My name is Clara Mae Henderson, though most folks around here just call me Granny Clara. I'm sitting here on my porch swing in the soft morning light, watching the sun paint the Georgia hills gold, and I've decided it's time to tell you my story. Not the pretty version I've been telling for years, but the real one. The one that starts in darkness but ends in light. I'm 87 years old now, and these weathered hands have built a life that many said I'd never have. They told me I was broken. They told me I was too damaged to amount to anything. They told me that what happened to me as a child would define me forever. Well, let me tell you something about being told what you can't do. It has a way of lighting a fire in your belly that burns hotter than any pain you've ever felt. You see me now, sitting in this rocking chair on the porch of my own home, the one I bought with my own money from the business I built with these two hands. You see the garden blooming with roses and tomatoes, the photos of my children and grandchildren lining the walls inside. You see a woman who made it. But what you don't see is the little girl who once believed she'd never make it to 18, let alone 87. Before I begin, I want you to know that this story isn't easy to tell. There are parts that still make my chest tight and my hands shake, even after all these years. But I'm telling it because somewhere out there, there's a child who needs to hear it. There's someone who thinks they're alone in their pain, who believes the lies that were told to them about their worth. This is for you, honey. This is so you know that no matter how dark the night gets, morning always comes. I was born in 1937 in a small town called Willow Creek, about 40 miles south of Atlanta. Back then, it was mostly farmland and dirt roads, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody's business, or at least thought they did. Funny how in a place where secrets were supposed to be impossible, the biggest ones hid in plain sight. The journey I'm about to share with you spans decades. It's about a mother who chose not to see, a man who wore a mask of kindness while harboring darkness, and a little girl who had to become her own hero. It's about betrayal that cuts deeper than any physical wound, and the long, winding road to forgiveness, not for them, but for myself. So pour yourself some sweet tea if you've got it, settle in, and let me take you back to where it all began. Back to a time when I still believed that mothers always protected their daughters and that the monsters in stories were the only ones we needed to fear. My earliest memories are painted in the warm colors of my grandmother's kitchen. Mama Ruth, we called her, and she was the heart of our family. I remember standing on a wooden stool beside her, my small hands covered in flour as she taught me to roll out biscuit dough. The smell of bacon grease and coffee filled that little house every morning, and her voice, Lord, her voice was like honey poured over gravel, sweet but strong. I lived with Mama Ruth for the first 7 years of my life, while my mother, Dolores, worked at the textile mill in the next town over. Those were good years, simple years. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Mama Ruth's house sat on 3 acres of red Georgia clay, with a vegetable garden out back, and chickens that I was responsible for feeding every morning. I'd march out there in my little flour sack dress, throwing corn and talking to those birds like they were my best friends. My mother would visit on Sundays, bringing store-bought cookies and promises that soon, real soon, she'd have enough saved up to get us our own place. She was beautiful, my mother, with dark hair that she wore pinned up like the movie stars in the magazines. When she smiled, which wasn't often, it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. I lived for those smiles, collected them like other children collected marbles. Mama Ruth used to watch my mother during those visits with eyes that held worry. I see it now, looking back, though I didn't understand it then. She'd pull my mother aside sometimes, their voices low and urgent in the kitchen, while I played with paper dolls on the living room floor. Once, I heard Mama Ruth say, "That child needs her mother, Dolores. Not visits, not promises. She needs you." But my mother had dreams bigger than our small town. She'd grown up poor, poorer than poor, and she was determined to be somebody. She talked about moving to Atlanta, about getting a job in one of those big department stores downtown, about finding a man who'd treat her like a queen. Mama Ruth would just shake her head and mutter prayers under her breath. I was 7 years old when everything changed. It was a Tuesday in March, 1944. I remember because the dogwood trees were just starting to bloom, and I'd picked a handful of flowers for the kitchen table. My mother arrived unannounced, driving a car I'd never seen before, wearing a dress that looked like it cost more than Mama Ruth's monthly groceries. Pack her things, she told Mama Ruth. I'm taking my daughter home. Home. The word felt foreign in my mouth. Home was here, with Mama Ruth, with the chickens in the garden and the quilt on my bed that smelled like lavender and snuff. But my mother had that look in her eyes, the one that meant no arguing. And Mama Ruth, bless her heart, just nodded and went to gather my few belongings. I cried the whole drive to our new place, silent tears that my mother ignored as she chattered about all the wonderful things waiting for us. She'd met someone, she said. A good man, a respectable man who owned his own business. His name was Robert, and he was going to take care of us. We'd have a real house with indoor plumbing and electric lights in every room. I'd have my own bedroom with wallpaper and a closet full of dresses. You'll love him, Clara May, she said, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror. He's so good with children. Never had any of his own, poor thing. His wife died young, tuberculosis, and he's been so lonely. But now he has us. The house was everything she promised and more. White with green shutters, a front porch with a swing, and a yard with grass so green it looked painted. Robert was standing on the porch when we pulled up, and my first thought was that he looked like a grandfather from a storybook. Gray hair neatly combed, clean shaven, wearing suspenders over a white shirt. He smiled when he saw us, and it reached his eyes. You must be Clara May, he said, bending down to my height. Your mother's told me so much about you. I hope we can be friends. He had peppermint candies in his pocket, the red and white striped kind, and he gave me one while my mother beamed beside him. The house smelled like furniture polish and something else, something I couldn't name, but that made me want to stay close to the door. But my mother was so happy, happier than I'd ever seen her, and I wanted to be happy too. My new room was painted yellow with daisies on the wallpaper. There was a real bed, not just a mattress on the floor, and a dresser with a mirror. Books lined a small shelf under the window, and there were toys I'd only seen in store windows. My mother had tears in her eyes as she showed me around. This is what I wanted for you, she whispered, pulling me close. This is the life you deserve. Those first weeks were like living in a dream. Robert was patient and kind, never raising his voice, always interested in what I had to say. He helped me with my schoolwork at the kitchen table, while my mother cooked dinner. He taught me to play checkers and let me win more often than not. He read to me before bed, his voice deep and soothing as he worked through the fairy tales in my new books. My mother glowed during this time. She hummed while she did housework, wore lipstick even on ordinary days, and laughed at all of Robert's jokes. They'd sit together on the porch swing in the evenings while I played in the yard, and I'd catch glimpses of her leaning into him, his arm around her shoulders, both of them looking content as cats in sunshine. But Mama Ruth's absence ached like a missing tooth. I asked to visit her, but there was always a reason why we couldn't. Too busy, too far. Maybe next week. My mother would change the subject, point out a new dress Robert had bought me or suggest we bake cookies together. The life she'd built for us was supposed to be perfect, and perfect lives didn't have room for looking backward. I started school that fall, and for the first time, I wasn't the poorest kid in class. My shoes were new, my dresses pressed, my lunch pail filled with good food. The other children were curious about my new father, as everyone called him, though the word felt strange in my mouth. I'd never had a father before, didn't know what one was supposed to be like. But Robert walked me to school that first day, his hand gentle on my shoulder, and the other parents nodded at him with respect. Your daddy owns the hardware store, a girl named Susan told me at recess. My mama says he's the richest man in town. Richest man in town. It sounded like something from a fairy tale, and in a way, that's what our life had become. My mother had found her prince, her castle, her happily ever after, and I was part of the package, the little princess in the yellow room with the daisy wallpaper. But even in fairy tales, there are shadows. They creep in at the edges, barely noticeable at first. A door that locks from the outside, a rule about never going into the basement, the way Robert's eyes would sometimes go flat and cold when my mother wasn't looking, like a snake sunning itself on a rock. I noticed these things the way children notice everything, filing them away without understanding their meaning. The way he'd rest his hand on my shoulder just a little too long. The way he'd insist on helping me with my bath, even though I was old enough to manage alone. The way my mother's smile would falter sometimes when she watched us together, before she'd shake her head and brighten again. He's so good to her, I heard her tell a neighbor once. So patient. Not all men would take on another man's child like that. Another man's child. That's what I was. Not his daughter, not really. Just something that came along with my mother, like a piece of furniture or a stray cat. But he was patient with me. That was true. Patient like a spider with all the time in the world. Winter came early that year, and with it, a change in the house that was as subtle as frost forming on a window. Robert started having headaches that kept him home from the store. My mother would fuss over him, bringing cold compresses and aspirin, while he sat in his chair by the fire. He'd watch me over the top of his newspaper, and something in his gaze made me want to be anywhere else. "Come sit with me, Clara May," he'd say when my mother was in the kitchen. "Tell me about your day." I'd perch on the edge of the sofa, as far from his chair as I could manage while still being in the same room. He'd ask about school, about my friends, about whether any boys had been talking to me. That last question always came with a strange intensity, even though I was only 7 and boys were nothing but noiseways and dirt to me. My mother started working at the church, organizing bake sales and visiting shut-ins. She was gone more and more, leaving Robert and me alone in that perfect house with its locked doors and watching shadows. She was building a reputation, she said, becoming the kind of woman who mattered in this town, the kind of woman who deserved a man like Robert. I started to dread the sound of her car pulling away, the click of her heels fading down the walk. Robert would wait until she was truly gone, then call me to him. "Just to talk," he said. "Just to spend time together. Just to be a family." But families didn't make you feel like a rabbit in a trap. Families didn't have secrets that sat heavy in your stomach like swallowed stones. Families didn't make you wish you could disappear into the wallpaper like the daisies in your room, becoming nothing but pattern and paste. The last good day I remember was Christmas Eve, 1944. My mother had decorated the house like something from a magazine, with garland on the mantel and a tree that touched the ceiling. She'd made sugar cookies and eggnog, and the 3 of us sat by the fire while the radio played carols. Robert gave me a porcelain doll with real hair and eyes that closed when you laid her down. My mother cried when she opened her gift, a string of pearls that must have cost more than Mama Ruth saw in a year. "I love you both so much," she said, the pearls glowing against her throat. "This is everything I ever wanted." I held that doll tight that night, whispering to her in the dark of my yellow room. I told her about Mama Ruth and the chickens, about how the dogwood trees looked in spring, about how sometimes I felt like I was watching my life through a window instead of living it. The doll stared back with her painted eyes, keeping my secrets safe in her hollow head. 2 days later, everything shattered. But that's getting ahead of myself. First, I need to tell you about the locks, and the basement, and the way a child learns to make herself small. I need to tell you about the slow erosion of safety, how it happens so gradually you don't notice until you're drowning. But most of all, I need to tell you about my mother, and how the person who should have saved me became part of my prison, because that's the betrayal that cut deepest, the wound that took the longest to heal. Not what he did, but what she didn't do. Not the monster in our house, but the woman who chose not to see him. The first time it happened, I thought I'd done something wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon in January, 2 weeks after Christmas. My mother had gone to her church meeting, and Robert had closed the store early due to the cold. I was in my room playing with the porcelain doll he'd given me when I heard him calling my name from downstairs. His voice was different somehow, thicker, like when he'd have a glass of whiskey after dinner. I found him in his study, a room I rarely entered. The walls were lined with books I wasn't allowed to touch, and the air smelled of pipe tobacco and something sharp that made my nose wrinkle. "Come here, Clara May," he said from his leather chair. "I want to show you something." What he showed me were pictures in a book, pictures that made my stomach feel funny and wrong. He held me on his lap while he turned the pages, his breath hot on my neck, his hands keeping me in place when I tried to squirm away. He said things I didn't understand, words that felt dirty in my ears. When my mother's car pulled into the driveway an hour later, he straightened my dress and smoothed my hair and told me this was our special secret. "Your mother wouldn't understand," he said, his gray eyes holding mine. "She might even be angry with you. We wouldn't want that, would we?" That night at dinner, I couldn't eat. The meatloaf my mother had made, usually my favorite, tasted like sawdust. She noticed, of course. Mothers always notice when their children don't eat. "Are you feeling all right, honey?" she asked, pressing her cool hand to my forehead. I opened my mouth to tell her, but Robert was watching me over his coffee cup, and the words died in my throat. What would I even say? That he showed me pictures. That he made me sit on his lap. It sounded silly even in my head, not like something worth getting angry about. And what if she did get angry, but at me instead of him? "I'm just tired," I said, and she accepted it, ruffling my hair and suggesting an early bedtime. That became the pattern. My mother would leave for her church work or her ladies' auxiliary meetings, and Robert would call me to his study. Sometimes it was pictures. Sometimes it was worse. He never hurt me, not in ways that left marks, but there are types of pain that don't show on the skin. He was careful, so careful, wrapping his sickness in soft words and father-daughter pretense. "This is what fathers do with their special girls," he'd say. "This is how we show love in our family." But I'd never seen Mama Ruth's husband do such things when he was alive. I'd never heard the other girls at school whisper about their fathers touching them in ways that made them feel hollow inside. I knew it was wrong, knew it with every fiber of my 7-year-old being, but I didn't have the words to explain why. The worst part was how he'd act when my mother was home. He'd be the perfect husband, the doting stepfather, helping with homework and reading bedtime stories like nothing had happened. He'd kiss my mother in the kitchen and compliment her cooking, and she'd beam at him like he'd hung the moon. Sometimes I'd catch her watching us together with such satisfaction, like she'd finally gotten everything right. I tried to tell her once, in February when the weight of the secret was crushing me like stones. She was brushing my hair before bed, humming a hymn from church, and the words just spilled out. "Mama, I don't like being alone with Robert." Her hands stilled in my hair. In the mirror I watched her face change, something flickering across it too fast to name. "Why would you say such a thing?" she asked, and her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "He shows me things. Does things. When you're gone, he calls me to his study and I don't like it." She spun me around on the stool, gripping my shoulders hard enough to hurt. Her face was pale except for 2 spots of color high on her cheeks. "Clara May Henderson, I don't ever want to hear you say such wicked things again. Do you understand me? Robert is a good man, a godly man. He's given us everything. How dare you make up stories about him?" "But Mama, I'm not making it up. He really does show me bad pictures and touch me in ways that feel wrong." The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My cheek burned, and tears sprang to my eyes more from shock than pain. My mother had never hit me before, never even raised her voice to me. "You listen to me," she said, her voice shaking. "Robert Moore is the best thing that ever happened to us. Without him, we'd still be living in that shack with Mama Ruth, wearing hand-me-downs and eating beans every night. Is that what you want? You want to go back to being poor?" "I want to go back to Mama Ruth," I whispered, and she slapped me again. "Mama Ruth can't give you what Robert can. Look around you, Clara May. Look at this house, these clothes, this life. You think any of this grows on trees? You think good men who'll take on another man's child come along every day?" She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. She pulled me against her, holding me so tight I could barely breathe. "You can't say things like that," she whispered into my hair. "You can't. People talk in this town. They're already watching us, waiting for us to fail. If you start spreading lies about Robert, we'll lose everything. Is that what you want? You want to ruin our lives?" I shook my head against her chest, my own tears soaking into her dress. I didn't want to ruin anything. I just wanted the bad feelings to stop. I wanted to feel safe in my own home. I wanted my mother to believe me, to protect me, to choose me over him. "Promise me," she said, pulling back to look into my eyes. "Promise me you'll never say such things again? Not to me, not to anyone." "I promise," I whispered, and something inside me broke with those words. The last bit of hope that my mother would save me crumbled like old paper. She never asked for details, never wanted to know exactly what Robert did in his study. She just painted over my truth with her own version of reality, one where Robert was a saint, and I was a wicked child with an overactive imagination. And maybe, I started to think she was right. Maybe I was misunderstanding things. Maybe this was normal and I was just too young to know better. But my body knew. It knew in the way I'd flinch when Robert entered a room. It knew in the nightmares that started plaguing me, dreams where I was drowning in black water while my mother stood on the shore, watching without moving. It knew in the way food started tasting like ash and my stomach hurt all the time. I stopped eating almost entirely by March. My teacher, Miss Patterson, noticed first. She kept me after school one day, her kind face creased with concern. "Clara May, honey, is everything all right at home? You seem different lately. Quieter. And you're getting so thin." For a moment, I almost told her. The words crowded in my mouth, desperate to escape. But then I remembered my mother's face, the slaps, the tears, the promise I'd made. And beyond that, I imagined what would happen if I told. Would anyone believe a 7-year-old girl over Robert Moore, respected businessman and church deacon? Would they take me away from my mother? Where would I go? "I'm fine, Miss Patterson," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. "Just haven't been hungry lately." She didn't look convinced, but what could she do? This was 1945 in small-town Georgia. Children didn't have hotlines to call or counselors to see. What happened in a family stayed in a family, and outsiders minded their own business. The criticism started that spring, though not the kind I'd feared. It wasn't about Robert and what he did to me. It was about me, the difficult child who didn't appreciate her blessings. My mother started telling people I was going through a phase, that I was jealous of having to share her attention. The church ladies would cluck their tongues when they saw me, whispering about how hard it must be for poor Robert, taking on such a troubled child. "You're so patient with her," I heard Miss Hamilton tell him after church one Sunday. "Not all men would put up with such behavior." Robert had smiled, humble and long-suffering. "She's been through a lot of changes. I'm sure she'll come around. We just have to show her love and patience." Love and patience. The words made me want to scream. But I'd learned by then that screaming only made things worse. So I became quieter, smaller, trying to take up as little space as possible. I stopped asking to visit Mama Ruth. I stopped complaining about being alone with Robert. I stopped everything except existing, and barely that. My mother watched this transformation with satisfaction, mistaking my surrender for acceptance. She started leaving me alone with Robert more often, confident that I'd learned my lesson. After all, I wasn't telling tales anymore. I wasn't causing trouble. I was being a good girl, the kind of daughter who deserved a nice home and pretty dresses. "See how much better things are when you're grateful?" she'd say, brushing my hair with gentle strokes. "Robert loves you so much. We're so lucky to have him." Lucky. The word was like a splinter under my skin. Other girls were lucky. They had fathers who taught them to ride bikes and helped with homework without payment and shame. They had mothers who believed them when they said they were scared. They had homes that felt safe instead of like traps with wallpapered walls. But I wasn't other girls. I was Clara May Henderson, the difficult child who didn't appreciate her good fortune, the liar who made up stories about the generous man who'd saved her mother from poverty, the ungrateful daughter who preferred a shack with her grandmother to a nice house with modern conveniences. At school, I watched the other children with their easy smiles and careless laughter, and I felt like I was from another planet. They complained about homework and squabbled over toys while I carried secrets that were eating me alive from the inside. They ran to their mothers with skinned knees and hurt feelings, while I had learned that mothers didn't always make things better. Sometimes, during recess, I'd stand at the edge of the playground and stare at the road that led out of town. I'd imagine walking down it, just walking and walking until I found somewhere Robert couldn't reach me. But I was 7 years old with nowhere to go, and no one to run to. Mama Ruth lived too far away, and even if I could get there, what would I tell her? How could I explain what my mother refused to see? So I stayed. I endured. I became an expert at reading Robert's moods, at knowing when to make myself scarce. I learned that if I was very still and very quiet during our sessions in the study, they ended sooner. I learned to leave my body and float somewhere near the ceiling, watching what happened to the little girl below, like it was happening to someone else. My mother noticed my withdrawal but misread it entirely. She thought I was finally settling in, finally accepting our new life. She started making plans for the future, talking about the young ladies' academy in Atlanta where I'd go when I was older, about the coming out party she'd throw when I turned 16, about the suitable young men from good families who'd court me. You'll have every advantage, she'd say, eyes bright with dreams I couldn't share. Every opportunity I never had. And it's all thanks to Robert. All thanks to Robert. Everything good in our lives we owed to him. That was the message, repeated so often it became like wallpaper in my mind. We were nothing without him. We'd be nothing again if we lost him. So whatever he wanted, whatever he took, it was a small price to pay for salvation from poverty. But I'd been poor with Mama Ruth, and I'd been happy. I'd worn flour sack dresses and eaten beans, and I'd felt safe. I'd rather have cardboard in my shoes than Robert's hands on my body. I'd rather have an outhouse than indoor plumbing in a house where I couldn't breathe. But these weren't choices a 7-year-old got to make. The doubts came from everyone but my mother. Robert doubted I'd ever tell anyone what he did. The church ladies doubted I was properly grateful for my good fortune. My teacher doubted I was as fine as I claimed to be. But the person whose doubt mattered most, the one who could have saved me with a single question, a moment of belief, chose certainty instead. She was certain Robert was a good man. She was certain I was a difficult child. She was certain that our perfect life was worth any price. And so I learned the hardest lesson a child can learn. That sometimes the monsters aren't strangers in the dark. Sometimes they're the men who buy you porcelain dolls and read you bedtime stories. And sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you choose the monsters instead. That's the doubt that haunted me for years afterward. Not doubt about what happened, because my body remembered even when my mind tried to forget, but doubt about my own worth, my own right to safety and protection. If my own mother could choose him over me, what did that say about who I was? What was wrong with me that made me so easy to sacrifice? These are the questions that followed me long after I left that house with its yellow walls and watching shadows. These are the doubts that criticism, no matter how well-meaning, only reinforced. Because when you've been told your truth is a lie often enough, you start to wonder if anything you feel is real. When your own mother calls you wicked for speaking your pain, you learn that pain is something to hide, something shameful, something that makes you difficult and ungrateful and unworthy of love. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Before I could learn to doubt myself so thoroughly, I had to survive what came next. I had to find the strength that even a 7-year-old can possess when pushed to the breaking point. I had to discover that sometimes, when no one else will save you, you have to save yourself. The breaking point came on a humid Thursday in July, 1945. I remember the date precisely because it was the day before my 8th birthday, and my mother had been bustling around all week preparing for a party I didn't want. She'd invited half the town, it seemed, determined to show everyone what a perfect family we were, how blessed I was to have such generous parents. That morning, she left early to pick up my cake from the bakery in the next town over. It was going to be 3 layers, she'd told me, with pink roses made of frosting and 8 candles that I'd blow out while everyone sang. She kissed my forehead before she left, told me to be good for Robert, and promised she'd be back before lunch. Robert waited exactly 10 minutes after her car disappeared down the road. I was in the kitchen, staring at a bowl of oatmeal I couldn't bring myself to eat, when I heard his footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, each one making my heart beat faster. He appeared in the doorway wearing his suspenders and white shirt, looking like any respectable grandfather except for his eyes. His eyes were different that morning, darker somehow, like storm clouds gathering. "Come with me, Clara May," he said, and there was something in his voice that made my skin crawl. "I have a special birthday present for you." I wanted to run. Every instinct in my small body screamed at me to bolt for the door, to flee into the Georgia heat and never stop running. But where would I go? And what would happen when my mother found me? I'd learned that defiance only made things worse, so I followed him up the stairs, my bare feet silent on the carpet. He led me not to his study but to my own room, that yellow prison with its cheerful daisies. He'd been in there while I was eating breakfast, I realized. The furniture had been rearranged, my bed pushed against the wall, a camera on a tripod set up near the window. The sight of it made my stomach drop like I'd fallen from a great height. "Today you're going to be my special model," he said, closing the door behind us. The lock clicked. a sound that echoed in my bones. We're going to take pictures for my collection. I'd seen his collection, hidden in a locked drawer in his study. Pictures of other little girls, their eyes vacant, their small bodies positioned like dolls. He'd shown them to me during our sessions, telling me how pretty they were, how good they were at keeping secrets. Now I was going to join them, another face in his drawer of shame. I don't want to, I whispered, the words scraping past the fear in my throat. His face changed then, the mask of kindness slipping to reveal something underneath that made me step backward until I hit the wall. He moved toward me, and I remember thinking how large he was, how his shadow swallowed mine completely. You don't want to, he repeated, his voice soft but dangerous. After everything I've done for you, after I saved you and your mother from poverty? This is how you repay my kindness? The familiar guilt rose in my chest, but this time it was met by something else. A spark of anger, small but bright, like a match struck in darkness. I thought of the other girls in those pictures, wondered if they'd been told the same lies, made to feel the same guilt. I thought of my mother, probably humming to herself as she drove to get my birthday cake, choosing not to know what happened in her absence. I want to go to Mama Ruth, I said, louder this time. I want to go home. The slap knocked me sideways, nothing like my mother's frustrated swats. This had force behind it, adult strength that sent me to my knees. My ear rang, and I tasted copper in my mouth. When I looked up at him, his face was red, a vein pulsing in his temple. This is your home, he said, grabbing my arm and hauling me to my feet. And you'll do as you're told, or I'll give you something to really cry about. But I was already crying, tears and snot running down my face as he positioned me in front of the camera. He wiped my face roughly with his handkerchief, muttering about ungrateful children and the things he had to endure. Then he started giving instructions, telling me how to stand, where to look, what to do with my hands. Something inside me turned to stone in that moment. I looked at the camera lens, that black eye that would capture my shame forever, and I made a decision. I wouldn't be another vacant-eyed girl in his collection. I wouldn't disappear into myself like I'd learned to do during our sessions. I would remember every second of this, burn it into my memory like a brand, because someday I would need to tell someone. Someday, someone would have to believe me. The session lasted hours, or maybe it just felt that way. The morning sun moved across the floor in slow increments, and still he clicked the camera, adjusted the lens, told me to smile, to stop crying, to be a good girl. My legs ached from standing, my face hurt from his slap. But worse than any physical pain was the knowledge that those pictures would exist forever. Proof of my shame, evidence of what I'd become. When he finally started packing up the camera, I thought it was over. But then he turned to me with that terrible softness in his eyes, the gentleness that always preceded the worst moments. You know what happens to little girls who tell secrets, don't you? He asked, sitting on my bed and patting the space beside him. I remained standing, my back pressed against the wall. They get sent away. Far away, to places where bad children go. Dark places, with no toys or books or birthday parties. Is that what you want? I shook my head, unable to speak. Your mother would be so disappointed, he continued, his voice hypnotic in its measured cadence. She's worked so hard to give you this life. If she knew how ungrateful you were, how difficult you've been, it would break her heart. You don't want to break your mother's heart, do you? No, I whispered. Good girl. He stood, smoothing his shirt, becoming once again the respectable businessman. Clean yourself up. Your mother will be home soon, and we want you looking pretty for your party tomorrow. He left me there, closing the door with a gentle click. I stood frozen for a long moment, then rushed to the window, pressing my forehead against the glass. Outside, the world went on as usual. Mrs. Henderson was hanging laundry next door. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Normal life happening just beyond my reach. That's when I saw it. The trellis that ran up the side of the house, right beside my window. My mother's climbing roses grew on it, pink and white blooms that filled my room with perfume on breezy days. I'd never thought of it as anything but decoration before, but now I saw it differently. I saw it as a ladder. The decision formed in my mind, fully made, like it had been waiting there all along. I couldn't tell anyone what was happening, because no one would believe me. I couldn't make it stop because I was just a child with no power, but I could leave. I could run. Even if I had nowhere to go, even if they caught me and brought me back, at least I would have tried. I waited until dark. My mother came home with the cake, 3 layers just as promised, and we ate dinner like a normal family. She chattered about the party, about which dress I should wear, about how proud she was to show me off to everyone. Robert smiled and nodded, playing the devoted stepfather, occasionally catching my eye with a look that said, "Remember our secret." They sent me to bed early, wanting me well rested for my big day. I lay in the dark, fully dressed under my nightgown, listening to the sounds of the house settling. My mother's laughter drifted up from the living room, followed by the low rumble of Robert's voice. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 9, then 10, then 11. Finally, the house fell silent. I waited another hour to be sure, then crept to the window. It opened with a squeak that sounded like thunder in the quiet night, and I froze, certain someone would come running. But no footsteps sounded in the hall, no doors opened. The house slept on, unaware that its prisoner was escaping. The trellis was sturdier than it looked, though the roses caught at my clothes and scratched my arms. I climbed down carefully, testing each foothold until my bare feet touched the grass. Then I ran. No shoes, no money, no plan beyond getting away. I ran down the street, past the sleeping houses with their neat lawns, past the church where my mother spent so much time, past the school where I pretended everything was fine. I knew only one place to go, though it was 20 miles away, and I had no idea how to get there beyond following the main road north. Mama Ruth. She would believe me. She would help me. She had to, because I had nowhere else to turn. The road outside town was dark, lit only by stars and a sliver of moon. My feet found every rock and rough patch, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. Behind me was that yellow room with its camera and its shame. Ahead was the only person who'd ever made me feel truly safe. I'd made it maybe 3 miles when I heard the car. The growl of an engine in the distance, headlights sweeping around a curve. My heart hammered as I dove into the bushes beside the road, thorns tearing at my nightgown. The car passed slowly, and I caught a glimpse of Robert's face through the window, scanning the sides of the road. They'd discovered I was gone. I stayed hidden until the sound of the engine faded, then emerged on shaking legs. They'd be back. They'd search every inch of this road. But I couldn't go back. I'd rather die in these woods than return to that house. So I left the road, plunging into the forest that ran alongside it. If I kept the road in sight but stayed hidden in the trees, maybe I could make it to Mama Ruth before they found me. The woods at night were terrifying in a different way than Robert was terrifying. This was an impersonal fear of creatures and sounds and the possibility of getting lost forever. But it was still preferable to the personal horror waiting for me at home. I stumbled through the underbrush, branches catching at my hair, my feet bleeding from rocks and roots. Every sound made me freeze, certain it was Robert coming to drag me back. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky pink and gold, when I finally saw the familiar bend in the road that meant Mama Ruth's house was near. I was exhausted, my legs barely able to carry me. But the sight of that little unpainted house with its chicken coop out back gave me a final burst of energy. I ran the last quarter mile, bursting through the front door without knocking. Mama Ruth was in the kitchen, just as I'd pictured her so many times. She turned from the stove, her face registering shock at the sight of me. I must have looked wild, my nightgown torn and dirty, my feet bloody, my hair full of leaves and twigs. "Lord have mercy," she breathed, dropping her spatula and rushing to me. "Clara May, child, what's happened to you?" I fell into her arms and finally felt safe enough to tell the truth. It poured out of me in broken sobs, the whole ugly story. The pictures, the locked doors, the things he did when my mother wasn't watching, the way she'd slapped me when I tried to tell her, called me wicked for speaking the truth. The birthday party I couldn't face, the camera in my room, the decision to run. Mama Ruth held me through it all, her weathered hands stroking my hair, making soft sounds of comfort and growing rage. When I finally ran out of words and tears, she pulled back to look at my face, her own eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen before. "You did right to come here," she said firmly. "You're safe now. That man will never touch you again. You hear me? Never." But even as she said it, we both heard the sound of tires on gravel outside. Through the window, I saw Robert's car pulling up, my mother in the passenger seat. They'd found me. My bid for freedom had lasted less than 12 hours. "You go on upstairs," Mama Ruth said, steel in her voice. "Get in my bed and pull the covers up. I'll handle this." I ran up the narrow stairs, diving into her bed that smelled of lavender and snuff, pulling her handmade quilt over my head. But I could still hear the voices from below, my mother's shrill accusations, Robert's calm explanations, and Mama Ruth's voice cutting through both like a blade. "That child came here bleeding and terrified," she said. "You want to tell me why?" "She's confused," my mother said. "She's been making up stories, terrible lies about Robert. We think she might be touched in the head." "Only thing touched here is that man's hands on a child," Mama Ruth shot back. "You know it's true, Dolores. I can see it in your eyes. You know what he is." The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother's voice, cold and final. "She's my daughter. I'm taking her home. Over my dead body. Then I'll call the sheriff. She's my child, Mama. You have no legal right to keep her." And that was the truth of it. In 1945, a grandmother had no rights over a parent. If my mother wanted me back I would go. The law was on her side, just as society was on Robert's side, just as everything seemed stacked against one small girl who'd tried to save herself. They argued for what felt like hours. Mama Ruth threatened to go to the authorities herself, to tell everyone in town what Robert had done. My mother countered that no one would believe her, that Robert was a respected man while we were just poor folks causing trouble. Back and forth they went, while I lay upstairs knowing how it would end. It always ended the same way. The people with power won, and the rest of us endured. Finally, Mama Ruth came upstairs. Her face was defeated, but her eyes still held fight. She sat on the edge of the bed and took my hands in hers. "I tried, baby girl," she said softly. "Lord knows I tried. But she's your mama, and the law says you got to go with her. Please don't make me go back," I begged. "Please, Mama Ruth. He'll be so angry. It'll be worse now." "I know." She pulled me close, and I felt her tears on my hair. "But you listen to me, Clara May. You're stronger than you know. You survived this long, and you'll keep surviving. And someday when you're old enough, you'll get out for good. You'll make a life far away from him, and from her too. You remember that, you hear? This isn't forever. But when you're 8 years old, a day feels like forever. A week is an eternity. The years stretching ahead before I could legally leave seemed impossibly long, too long to endure. Still, I nodded against her shoulder, trying to believe her words. She gave me a small cloth bag before they took me away. Inside was a silver thimble that had belonged to her mother, a photograph of her and me feeding the chickens, and $5 in coins. "You hide this," she whispered. "Hide it good. Someday you might need running money again." Robert waited by the car, his face carefully neutral. My mother wouldn't look at me directly. I climbed into the back seat, my body feeling like it belonged to someone else. As we drove away, I watched Mama Ruth standing on her porch, her figure growing smaller and smaller until the road curved and she disappeared from view. The drive home was silent, except for my mother's occasional sniffles. Robert drove with both hands on the wheel, the picture of responsible fatherhood. When we reached the house, the one that had never felt like home, he finally spoke. "Go to your room," he said quietly. "We'll discuss your behavior after your party." My party. My 8th birthday party, where half the town would come to celebrate in our perfect house with our perfect family. Where I would wear a pretty dress and blow out candles and pretend that I hadn't just tried to run away in the night. Where everyone would see what they wanted to see, and no one would notice the little girl disappearing behind her smile. I climbed the stairs to my yellow room, noticing that the furniture had been put back in its original places. No sign of the camera, no evidence of what had happened the day before. It was as if I'd imagined it all, as if the torn nightgown in the laundry basket and the cuts on my feet were from some other girl's story. I sat on my bed and opened Mama Ruth's cloth bag again, running my finger over the smooth surface of the thimble. Such a small thing, but it was proof that someone in this world knew the truth and believed me. Someone saw me as more than a difficult child or an ungrateful daughter. Someone thought I was worth saving, even if she couldn't save me herself. That thimble became my talisman in the months and years that followed. When Robert's visits to my room became more frequent, when my mother's denial became more entrenched, when the weight of pretending threatened to crush me entirely, I would hold that small piece of silver and remember Mama Ruth's words. This isn't forever. Someday I would get out for good. But first I had to survive. And survival, I was learning, sometimes meant becoming someone you didn't recognize. It meant smiling at birthday parties while your inside screamed. It meant saying yes, sir, and no, sir, to the man who stole your childhood. It meant watching your mother choose blindness over sight, comfort over truth, him over you. The first step toward freedom hadn't worked, but it had taught me something valuable. I'd found the courage to run once. Someday, when I was older and smarter and had somewhere to go, I would run again. And that time, I wouldn't let them bring me back. The birthday party went on as planned. 50 people crowded into our house that Saturday afternoon, filling it with laughter that felt like broken glass in my ears. I wore the pink dress my mother had bought, smiled until my face ached, blew out candles on that 3-layer cake while wishing I could disappear. Everyone sang while Robert played the proud father, his hand heavy on my shoulder. After everyone left, my mother went to bed early with a headache. She kissed my forehead, told me what a good girl I'd been, then climbed the my stairs, leaving me alone with Robert. "That was quite an adventure you had yesterday," he said from his chair. "Did you really think you could get away?" The new lock on my bedroom door was installed the next day, a brass deadbolt that locked from the outside. The windows were nailed shut, painted over so it wouldn't show. Even the phone got a padlock. Our house became a fortress designed to keep me in. School started in September, and I thought maybe there I could find help. But Robert volunteered for everything, donated books, charmed everyone. By October, he was on the school board. The abuse continued, worse now because he was angry about my escape attempt. The camera became a regular fixture in my room. I tried telling once more, this time to the school nurse when I went with stomach pains. Mrs. Keller was young with gentle hands. "My stepfather takes pictures of me," I said when she asked if everything was all right at home. "Bad pictures. He touches me." Her face changed. "That's a very serious accusation. Are you sure you're not confused?" "I'm not confused. He has a camera. He locks my door." The next day I was in the principal's office where my mother sat crying while Robert stood behind her, concerned and fatherly. "Clara May has been under stress," my mother explained. "She's made up these stories before. We've been considering professional help." "Perhaps a special school," Robert added sadly. The threat terrified me more than his camera. I knew about places where they sent difficult children. "I'm sorry," I said. "I made it up." And that was it. I stopped trying to tell anyone. Robert had won, building a wall of respectability no accusation could scale. Winter came early that year, bringing darkness that seeped into my bones. I stopped eating, started hurting myself in small ways, pressing fingernails into my palms until they left crescents of pain. It was pain I controlled, unlike everything else. Spring arrived with cruel beauty. I turned 9 with no party, grateful for the reprieve. Then came a Tuesday in April when my mother left for a 3-day church conference in Atlanta. The moment her car disappeared, Robert's mask dropped. 3 days, he said softly. 3 whole days with no interruptions. I ran to my room, but the lock only worked from outside. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. This was different, worse than before. I did the only thing I could think of. I opened the window facing the Hendersons' house, the one they'd forgotten to nail shut, and screamed. Screamed with everything in me until Mrs. Henderson appeared in her yard, looking up in alarm. "Help me," I shouted. "Please help me." Robert burst through my door, trying to pull me from the window, but I held on, still screaming. Neighbors gathered on our lawn as he called down about my mental troubles, my episodes. But I kept screaming, kept fighting, and for once my reputation as a troubled child worked in my favor. They didn't leave. Then Robert made his mistake. In frustration, he hit me hard enough to split my lip, blood spattering the white window frame. The crowd saw it all, saw a grown man strike a child begging for help. Mr. Henderson marched to our door. "Open up, Robert Moore, or I'm breaking it down. Someone call Sheriff Patterson." For the first time, I saw fear in Robert's eyes. He let me go and went downstairs. The moment he left, I grabbed Mama Ruth's cloth bag and climbed out onto the porch roof. The neighbors gasped as they saw me, bloody and desperate. "Jump," Mrs. Henderson called, arms outstretched. "I'll catch you." So I jumped. We tumbled together onto the grass. She pulled me close, stiffening as she saw my split lip and the older bruises on my arms. By the time Sheriff Patterson arrived, I was surrounded by neighbor women, all seeing with new eyes what had been there all along. I told the sheriff everything. This time, someone listened. Maybe it was the blood on my face, or the locked doors he insisted on seeing, or the camera equipment hastily hidden but still visible. They took Robert away in handcuffs that day. My mother arrived home the next day to find her perfect life in ruins. She stood in Miss Henderson's living room, still wearing her church dress, and looked at me like I was a stranger. "How could you?" she asked. "How could you?" I asked back. "You were supposed to protect me." She slapped me in front of everyone. But this time I didn't cry. I just looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "I'll never forgive you for this," she said. As it turned out, she wouldn't have to. The state decided I was better off away from her. The investigation began, Robert's secrets slowly unveiled. The pictures in his study became evidence instead of shame. My word finally carried weight. Not everyone believed me. Some whispered I destroyed a good man, that my mother was the real victim. But enough believed. Enough saw. Enough said this has to stop. That day in Mrs. Henderson's kitchen, surrounded by women who'd chosen to see instead of look away, I felt something almost forgotten. Hope. The setbacks hadn't killed me. Robert hadn't broken me completely. I was 9 years old and I'd survived more than any child should, but I'd survived. The road ahead was long, full of different challenges, but I jumped from a roof to save myself. After that, anything seemed possible. The foster home in Macon wasn't much to look at, just a white farmhouse with too many children and not enough beds, but it was heaven to me. No locks on the doors, no cameras, no Robert. Mrs. Garrett, who ran the place, was a stout woman with kind eyes who'd seen too many broken children to be shocked by another one. The first night there, I slept with Mama Ruth's thimble clutched in my fist, half expecting to wake up back in that yellow room. But morning came with the sound of roosters and children arguing over breakfast, normal sounds that made me cry with relief. I was free. Really, truly free. The trial took 6 months to get started. They found more than just pictures in Robert's house. They found letters from other girls, evidence of a pattern going back years. My mother hired him a lawyer with the money he'd given her, stood by him right up until they showed her the photographs. Not just of me, but of others. So many others. I'll never forget her face in that courtroom when she finally saw what he was. Like watching a mirror shatter in slow motion. She aged 10 years in 10 seconds, her perfect posture crumbling as the prosecutor laid out photo after photo. When she looked at me across the courtroom, I saw something I'd never seen before. She saw me. Really saw me. And the weight of what she'd refused to see nearly killed her right there. Robert got 25 years. The judge called him a predator who'd hidden behind respectability, using his position to access and silence vulnerable children. When they led him away, he looked at me one last time, and I made myself meet his gaze. I wanted him to see that he hadn't broken me. That I was still here, still fighting, still telling the truth he'd tried so hard to bury. My mother tried to get custody back after the trial, but the state wouldn't hear of it. She'd known, they said. Maybe not everything, but enough. She'd chosen not to protect her child, and that was unforgivable in the eyes of the law. She wrote me letters I didn't open, sent presents I gave away. What could she possibly say that would undo the years of betrayal? I stayed with Mrs. Garrett until I was 12, learning what normal felt like. She taught me practical things like cooking and sewing, but more importantly, she taught me I had worth beyond what had been done to me. When nightmares woke me, she'd make cocoa and sit with me until dawn, never pressing for details, just being present. School was hard at first. Word got out about the trial, and children can be cruel. They whispered about me, called me names I won't repeat, excluded me from their games. But I'd survived Robert. Playground bullies were nothing compared to that. I focused on my studies, determined to build a future that belonged only to me. When I was 13, something shifted. A new girl named Sarah arrived at school, and she didn't know my story. She just saw a quiet girl who liked to read and invited me to sit with her at lunch. That simple kindness cracked something open in me. Maybe I could be more than the girl things had happened to. Maybe I could just be Clara May. High school brought new challenges and new possibilities. I excelled in English and history, subjects where understanding human nature mattered. My teachers noticed my potential, encouraged me to think about college. College. The idea seemed impossible for a foster kid with a past like mine, but Mrs. Garrett wouldn't let me dismiss it. You got a brain in that head, she'd say. Shame to waste it feeling sorry for yourself. So I studied, threw myself into books like they were life preservers. Won essay contests, earned a small scholarship, graduated third in my class. The girl who'd been called a liar and troublemaker stood on that stage in cap and gown, proving everyone wrong just by existing. College at Georgia State Teachers College was terrifying and wonderful. For the first time, I was just another student. My roommate didn't know about Robert or the trial or the foster home. I could reinvent myself, become whoever I wanted to be. I chose to become a teacher. If I could help even one child the way Mrs. Garrett had helped me, it would be worth it. It was in my junior year that I met Thomas. He was studying agriculture, a farm boy with gentle hands and a smile that made me forget, just for moments, that men had ever been anything but kind. He courted me slowly, respecting every boundary, never pushing for more than I could give. When I finally told him about my past, expecting him to run, he just held my hand and said, "That wasn't your fault. You know that, right?" We married the week after graduation in a simple ceremony with Mrs. Garrett and a few friends. No white dress or church bells, just promises made in a judge's chambers. My mother wasn't invited. I'd heard through the grapevine that she'd remarried, moved to Florida, started over. Good for her. We'd both chosen our paths. Teaching gave me purpose. Every day I stood in front of those children. I looked for the ones like me, the quiet ones, the ones who flinched too easily, the ones whose smiles never reached their eyes. I couldn't save them all, but I could create a safe space for 8 hours a day. I could listen when they tried to tell me things. I could believe them. Thomas and I had 3 children of our own, 2 boys and a girl, all raised with the fierce protection I'd never known. We taught them their bodies belonged to them, that secrets that felt bad should always be told, that no adult had the right to make them uncomfortable. Maybe I was overprotective, but they grew up confident and unafraid, which was all I'd wanted. The success felt surreal sometimes. The girl who jumped from a roof to escape became a woman, with a mortgage and lesson plans, and children who called her mama. I'd built exactly the life they said I'd never have. Proved wrong everyone who'd written me off as damaged goods. But the real success came in smaller moments. The first time I slept through the night without nightmares. The day I realized I'd gone hours without thinking about Robert. The moment my daughter ran to me with a skinned knee, trusting completely that I'd make it better. These were the victories that mattered, the proof that trauma didn't have to be forever. I'd been teaching for 15 years when I got the call. My mother was dying, cancer that had started in her lungs and spread everywhere. The nurse who called said she'd been asking for me, that she had something she needed to say. I almost hung up. What could she possibly have to say after all these years? But something made me go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the need to show her what I'd become, despite her failures. Maybe it was just time. I drove to Florida alone, leaving Thomas with the children, following roads that led backward into memory. She looked small in that hospital bed, nothing like the beautiful woman who'd chosen Robert's house over my safety. The cancer had taken her beauty, her pride, everything but her eyes. Those were the same, dark and full of something I couldn't name. "Clara May," she whispered when she saw me. "You came." I sat in the visitor's chair, not too close, and waited. She studied my face like she was memorizing it, taking in the woman I'd become. "I knew," she said finally. "I knew what he was. Not at first, but later. I knew and I didn't stop it." The words hung between us like a bridge over 30 years of silence. I'd waited so long to hear them, but now they just felt hollow. "Why?" I asked, the only question that mattered. She closed her eyes. "Because I was weak. Because I was afraid of being poor again. Because I thought if I pretended hard enough, it would become true. Because I was a coward who chose comfort over my own child." "Yes," I said simply. "You were. I dream about it, she continued. Every night I dream about that day you tried to tell me. I see your face, how hope died in your eyes when I slapped you. I've lived with that for 30 years, and I'll die with it too. Good, I said, and meant it. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of decades pressing down. Then she reached for something on the bedside table, a manila envelope worn soft with handling. I saved every letter you didn't open, she said. Every birthday card, every Christmas note. I know you don't want them, but I needed you to know I wrote them. That I never stopped thinking about you, even if I didn't deserve to. I took the envelope but didn't open it. Some words come too late to matter. I have children now, I told her. 3 of them. They're happy and safe and loved. They know they can tell me anything, and I'll believe them. They know I'll choose them over anyone and anything, always. Tears ran down her weathered cheeks. That's how it should be. That's how I should have been. Yes, I said again. It is. I stayed until she fell asleep, then left that hospital room and never went back. She died 3 days later, and I didn't attend the funeral. Our story had ended long before her death, ended the day she chose him over me. But I'd needed to see her one last time, to show her and myself that I'd survived her failures, that I'd become everything she'd said I'd never be. The drive home was long, but I felt lighter with each mile. In my pocket, Mama Ruth's thimble caught the light through the window, a reminder of the one person who'd believed me when it mattered. I'd carried it for 30 years, through foster homes and college, through marriage and motherhood, through all the moments when I'd chosen to keep going despite everything. Success isn't always what people think it is. It's not just the house you own, or the job you have, or the family you build. Sometimes success is simply surviving what should have destroyed you. Sometimes it's becoming the person who would have saved you. Sometimes it's sitting in a classroom full of children and knowing that if one of them tries to tell you something, you'll listen, you'll believe, you'll act. They gave Robert 25 years, but I got life. A whole life, rich and full, and mine. That's the ultimate victory over men like him and women like my mother. They tried to make me nothing, but I became everything. They tried to silence me, but I found my voice. They tried to break me, but I bent instead, and learned that bending isn't the same as breaking. Bending is how we survive the storms. Breaking is what happens to those who refuse to see the truth. I proved them all wrong, every last person who said I was too damaged to amount to anything. But more importantly, I proved myself right. Right to run that night. Right to scream from that window. Right to jump from that roof. Right to tell the truth even when no one wanted to hear it. Right to survive, to thrive, to turn my pain into purpose. That's success. That's victory. That's the gift I gave myself by refusing to let their failures define my future. So here I sit, 87 years old, on this porch where I started my story an hour ago. The sun has climbed higher now, warming these old bones that have carried me through more than they should have had to. My hands, spotted with age but still steady, rest on this quilt my grandmother made before I was born. Not Mama Ruth, but her mother, a woman I never met, but whose stitches connect me to a line of survivors I'm only now beginning to understand. You know, I didn't tell this story for sympathy. Lord knows I've had a lifetime to make peace with what happened in that house with the yellow walls. I tell it because somewhere right now, there's a little girl or boy staring at a locked door, wondering if anyone will ever believe them. There's a child carrying secrets that are eating them alive, thinking they're alone in their pain. Baby, if you're listening, you're not alone. You've never been alone. The hardest truth I've learned in all these years is that the people who are supposed to protect us sometimes don't. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes they won't. My mother chose not to see, because seeing would have cost her everything she thought she wanted. But her blindness cost me everything I needed: safety, trust, the basic belief that I mattered more than appearances. For years I hated her more than I hated Robert. He was a monster, yes, but monsters are what they are. They don't pretend to be anything else, not really. The mask is just hunting camouflage. But my mother, she was supposed to be my protector, my champion, the one person who would always choose me. Her betrayal cut deeper than any of his touches because it told me I wasn't worth saving. It took me 40 years to understand that her failure wasn't about me at all. It was about her own broken places, her own fears, her own desperate need to be something other than what she was. She'd grown up hungry and ashamed, and Robert offered her a way out. When choosing me meant going back to that hunger and shame, she couldn't do it, wouldn't do it. That weakness was hers, not mine. I think about the other children who weren't believed. The ones who told and told and told, but nobody listened. The ones who didn't have a Mrs. Henderson to catch them when they jumped. The ones who didn't survive to build the life I built. Their ghosts sit with me sometimes in the evening light, and I tell them what I wish someone had told me. You were worth saving. Every single one of you is worth saving. People ask me if I forgive my mother. It's a complicated question with a complicated answer. I forgive the frightened woman who thought poverty was worse than anything. I forgive the girl she was who never learned her own worth. I forgive the mother who wanted to give me everything but couldn't give me the one thing I needed. But I don't forgive the choice she made to sacrifice her child for her comfort. Some things shouldn't be forgiven. They should be remembered, learned from, and never repeated. As for Robert, I don't think about forgiveness there. You don't forgive a rabid dog for biting. You just make sure it can't bite anyone else. He died in prison 15 years into his sentence, and I felt nothing when I heard. No relief, no satisfaction, nothing. He'd already taken enough of my emotional energy. I wasn't going to waste any more on his memory. The healing, when it came, was slower than anyone tells you. It wasn't like the movies where one good cry fixes everything. It was years of nightmares that gradually came less often. It was learning to let Thomas touch me without flinching, then learning to want his touch. It was watching my children play and fighting the urge to never let them out of my sight. It was choosing, over and over, to trust when everything in me screamed that trust was dangerous. Some days I failed. Some days the past was stronger than the present, and I'd find myself back in that yellow room, 7 years old and terrified. Thomas learned to recognize those days, to give me space while staying close enough that I knew I wasn't alone. The children learned that sometimes Mama needed extra hugs, though I never told them why until they were adults themselves. Building a life after trauma is like constructing a house on ground that's been shaken by earthquakes. You have to dig deeper for the foundation, use stronger materials, add extra supports. But it can be done. I'm living proof that it can be done. Every birthday party I threw for my children, every parent-teacher conference I attended, every normal, boring, beautiful day was a brick in the house I built to replace the one that tried to destroy me. I became a teacher, but really I became a guardian. Over 35 years in the classroom, I caught dozens of children trying to tell me things without words. The girl who wore long sleeves in August. The boy who flinched when male teachers raised their voices. The child who drew the same dark picture over and over. I listened with more than my ears. I watched with more than my eyes. And when they finally found the courage to speak, I believed them. Every time. Without question. Sometimes that meant making reports that went nowhere. Sometimes it meant watching a child return to a dangerous home because the system failed them like it almost failed me. But sometimes, gloriously, it meant being the adult who finally heard them, who took action, who helped them escape their yellow rooms. Those victories sustained me through the defeats. My own children grew up knowing they were precious and protected. Maybe I went overboard sometimes. Maybe they rolled their eyes at my endless safety talks. But they also grew up confident in their own worth, secure in the knowledge that their bodies belonged to them, certain that their mother would move heaven and earth to keep them safe. They're adults now with children of their own, and I see them passing on those same lessons. The cycle of silence broke with me. Thomas passed 5 years ago, peacefully in his sleep after 58 years of marriage. He was the gentlest man I ever knew, patient with my broken places, steadfast when the nightmares came. He showed me that love didn't have to hurt, that hands could heal instead of harm, that a house could be a sanctuary instead of a prison. I miss him every day, but I'm grateful for every moment we had. These days I volunteer at a shelter for women and children escaping abuse. I sit with mothers who chose their children over their comfort, who ran with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the determination to save their babies. I tell them they're brave. I tell them they're good mothers. I tell them what my mother should have done, and I watch their shoulders straighten with the knowledge that someone understands. And sometimes I sit with children who've been through things no child should know. I don't make them talk if they're not ready. I just sit with them, this old woman who survived, and let them see that there's a future beyond their pain, that they can grow up and have normal lives and even be happy. That what happened to them doesn't have to define them forever. The thing about trauma, especially childhood trauma, is that it changes you on a cellular level. It rewires your brain, alters your nervous system, leaves marks that don't show but never fully fade. You don't get over it. You don't forget it. You don't pretend it didn't happen, but you can learn to carry it differently. You can choose what it makes you instead of letting it choose for you. I chose to become someone who believes children, someone who acts on that belief, someone who understands that pretty houses can hide ugly secrets and that respectable men can be monsters and that mothers don't always protect their young. But I also chose to become someone who knows that survival is possible, that broken children can grow into whole adults, that the worst thing that happens to you doesn't have to be the last thing that defines you. If you're listening to this, and you're in your own yellow room right now, hear me say this. It's not your fault. Whatever they're doing to you, whatever they're telling you, however they're making you feel, it's not your fault. You are not broken. You are not dirty. You are not worthless. You are a child who deserves protection and safety and love, and if the adults in your life aren't providing those things, that's their failure, not yours. Find someone to tell. Keep telling until someone listens. And if the first person doesn't believe you, that's on them, not you. Tell a teacher, a neighbor, a friend's parent, a counselor, anyone. Keep telling. Scream from windows if you have to. Jump from roofs if that's what it takes. Your life is worth saving, even if the people who should be saving it won't. And if you're listening to this as an adult survivor, carrying your own yellow room memories, know that it's never too late to heal. Never too late to speak your truth. Never too late to build the life they tried to steal from you. The path is different for everyone. Some need therapy. Some need medication. Some need faith. Some need art or writing or running or whatever helps them process the pain. There's no wrong way to heal as long as you're not hurting yourself or others. I'm 87 years old, and I still have days when the past feels closer than the present. But I also have days when I can't remember Robert's face, when the yellow room is just a color and a direction, when my mother is just a woman who made terrible choices that had nothing to do with my worth. Those days come more often now, gift of time and distance and the healing that comes from telling your truth. The last thing I want to say is about shame. Shame is the weapon they use to keep us silent. Shame tells us we're complicit, that we somehow invited or deserved what happened. Shame makes us small and quiet and easy to control. But shame is a liar. What happened to me was not shameful. My body's responses were not shameful. My inability to stop a grown man as a small child was not shameful. The only shame in this story belongs to the adults who failed to protect me. So I tell this story without shame. I tell it for the 7-year-old Clara May, who thought she'd never make it to 18. I tell it for the 9-year-old who jumped from a roof to save herself. I tell it for the young woman who chose to become a teacher so she could be the adult she'd needed. I tell it for my children and grandchildren, so they understand why Granny Clara sometimes stares at nothing with fierce eyes, remembering battles they'll never have to fight. But mostly, I tell it for you. You who are fighting your own battles with your own Roberts and your own mothers who won't see. You who are trying to build something beautiful from the rubble of what was done to you. You who wonder if the pain will ever end, if the memories will ever stop hurting, if you'll ever feel whole. You will. Maybe not today. Maybe not this year. But someday you'll realize you've gone a whole day without thinking about it, then a week. Then you'll build a life so full of good things that the bad things have to shrink to make room. You'll discover that surviving was just the beginning. The real victory is in the living that comes after. So live. Live fiercely and fully, and without apology. Build the life they tried to prevent you from having. Love with the heart they tried to break. Trust with the spirit they tried to crush. Speak with the voice they tried to silence. Become everything they said you'd never be, and then become even more. That's how we win. Not by forgetting what happened, but by refusing to let it be the end of our story. My story didn't end in that yellow room. It didn't end when my mother chose him over me. It didn't end when I jumped from that roof. It began there. My real story, the one I chose for myself, began the moment I decided I was worth saving. And you, dear one, you are worth saving too. You always have been. You always will be. No matter what they told you. No matter what they did. No matter how alone you feel. You are worth saving, worth healing, worth every good thing life has to offer. Trust that. Believe that. Live that truth until it drowns out all the lies. The sun is high now, warming the earth and calling the day forward. I've told my story, laid out the pieces of a life that was broken and broken and mended again, until the mending became stronger than the original fabric. My hope is that somewhere in these words you found what you needed. Permission to speak. Permission to heal. Permission to leave the yellow rooms of your past and step into the light of your own choosing. Remember, you're not alone. You never were. Every survivor who came before you is cheering for your freedom. Every child who finds safety because you spoke your truth is part of your legacy. Every moment you choose healing over harm, truth over silence, love over fear, you change the world a little bit. That's enough from this old woman. Time to water my garden and check on those tomatoes. Life goes on, you see. Even after the worst things, especially after the worst things, life insists on going on. And we survivors, we go on with it. Scarred but not broken. Bent but not defeated. Changed but not destroyed. We go on. And that's the greatest victory of all.